Good morning.
Sorry, Professor Marwala, we have not yet introduced you. We need to say a few words before we allow you to take over the screen. Just a minute,
yeah.
Thank you.
No, thanks. I just got a message saying that please share your video or something like that.
So excellent. We are glad to have you present with us this morning.
Yeah, thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to our first keynote address for the HealthTasa 2020 conference. We are very honored and privileged to have Professor Marwala with us, who is currently the VC of the University of Johannesburg. Professor Marwala holds a BSc in Mechanical Engineering and a magna cum laude at that, which is outstanding, from Case Western Reserve University. He also holds a Master in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Pretoria and a PhD from the University of Cambridge. He has an extensive track record in human capacity development, having supervised 47 master and 30 PhD graduates to completion, an outstanding track record indeed. He has also published 20 books, over 300 papers in journals, proceedings and book chapters, and holds 3 international patents. And we assume that to be in the field of mechanical engineering. He has received more than 45 awards, with the President's Award from the National Research Foundation as really being a highlight, I think, in his career. Ladies and gentlemen, may we give our undivided attention for the next 40 to 50 minutes or so to Professor Marwala. The screen is over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Yesterday, I was requested to speak only for 15 minutes so that we can leave time for us to be able to engage on a conversation as to where we are going. So as I was reflecting on my talk today, I really want to talk about the impact of the 4th Industrial Revolution in all aspects of our lives, and what we should do about that, and what are some of the changes that we should expect, certainly in higher education. I'm just going to go to the next page. Yeah. So now, maybe before I talk about the changes that are happening around us, I really would like to first talk about the 4th Industrial Revolution. And before I talk about the 4th Industrial Revolution, I really would like to talk about other revolutions that preceded the 4th Industrial Revolution. The first Industrial Revolution happened in the 17th century in England. Of course, it was during the time of the scientific revolution. For those of us who have studied science, will remember names such as Newton, James Watt. And what really happened in this revolution, we started using steam engine to mechanize production. So to use machines to produce goods and services. I'm going to characterize this era as the era of knowledge formulation, formulating the basics of science. It was during the time when Newton invented gravitation and the laws of motion. It was during the time when we actually started understanding heat and so on and so forth. And of course, because of this industrial revolution, things like steam trains came about. It is quite ironic that the steam train was used in South Africa until, I think, the 70s and the early 80s. Interesting that such an old technology actually persisted for that long. Like any other industrial revolution, there were many people who thought this revolution is taking away our jobs. In England, the Luddites organized themselves with a mission to go to industries to destroy machines. Of course, they failed, and the industrial revolution moved on. Then came the second industrial revolution, knowledge from evolution. Now, electromagnetism, Einstein's theory of relativity comes directly from this. Names such as Faraday, Maxwell, Hans, Ørsted are actually quite prominent in this era. So in this era, we invented electricity and displaced workers who were working in candle manufacturing industry because there was no need to have so many people making candles if people are going to use electricity. And it was also the era in which an electric motor was discovered. An electric motor and then electricity is the same mechanism. And that was ushering the mass production of goods and services. Electric motor is that thing that makes that conveyor belt in that you see in airports bringing your bag. You know, that same process is used in production lines. If you go to VW plant, you realize that there are lots of movement of whatever is being made, and then certain parts being inserted. Now, the third industrial revolution was the electronics age, semiconductors age, the era of computers that ultimately led to the era of the internet. So now we are in the fourth industrial revolution where technologies in the cyberspace, physical space, and biological spaces are actually changing every aspect of our lives. And this is absolutely going to have all sorts of big implications of who we are and what we do. Chief amongst these technologies is the technology called artificial intelligence, which is actually the subject of my PhD thesis. Artificial intelligence is machines that are intelligent enough to be able to do things that used to be done by human beings. AI now plays better chess than a human being. AI now is able to do read medical images better than a human being, a human doctor. We can even speak to AI machines. For those of us who are with Siri, we know we can be able to speak to Siri. It can be able to take instructions. Now, the consequence of this in all sorts of jobs is quite substantial. There are many people who think that only blue-collar work is going to disappear as a result of the fourth industrial revolution. They could not be mistaken. In fact, if you go to the banking industry, where this technology is being implemented at an astonishing rate, you will realize that lots of white-collar jobs that happen behind the scenes is being replaced by intelligent machines that are powered by artificial intelligence. In fact, the blue-collar work is slightly more difficult to automate than the white-collar work. In fact, what is happening now, what is emerging is what is called the silver-collar jobs. These are jobs for people who are increasingly using technology to do what they do. Of course, the issue of jobs disappearing is not new. In the 60s, we used to have an elevator minder. This will be a person who comes to a lift, inside the lift, and their job was to assist you to go to whichever floor you are going. But now that whole process was automated with a keypad. And now when you get into an elevator, you just press the floor where you are going. And because of that keypad, that individual that used to be necessary in every high-rise building no longer has a job. So these developments are actually changing every aspect of our lives. Now, what are the consequences of these developments? The consequences of this development is that we are reaching what is called the post-work era. So the post-work era basically means the workplace is going to be smaller if you count the number of people who are in the workforce, with all sorts of implications on unemployment. How do you survive if you're out of your job? Does the taxman still collect as much taxes if a large section of our population is removed from the workforce? And if that is the case, that a large amount of people are going to be taken out of the workforce, we have to come up with other ideas to take care of those people. Some of the ideas that have been proposed is the universal basic income. So this is really the era in which we are entering, the post-work era. I used to work for South African breweries more than 20 years ago. And they used to have a brewery in Port Elizabeth that used to employ 4,000 people. They automated it around about 2002, and it could be operated by 35 people. And you can go there, it's still there, it's a little bit old. But that whole thing used to employ more than 4,000 people. Now it can be operated by just 35 people. This is actually quite significant if you think about it. Now, those 35 people, do they make more beer than they made in the past? It turns out that they now make more beer than in the past because automated factories are more productive than unautomated factories. And that is why we should not try to stop automation, because if we try to stop automation, we're just moving production elsewhere where automation happens. And this is basically what happened to our textile industry. That has effectively died. We will need to look at new skills because this fourth industrial revolution is going to introduce the silver collar work that requires different types of skills. And as universities, what are we doing about it? Here at the University of Johannesburg, artificial intelligence is a compulsory subject for all our students, irrespective of what they are studying. And of course, it's not artificial intelligence from a computer science perspective. It's artificial intelligence for general knowledge purposes, so that our people can be skilled for the future. The nature of our political economy is going to change. Those with money are going to become, to own these robots and are going to produce more and more and more goods. And those without money are going to be thrown into the margins of society. But of course, the capitalist economy does not just survive on production. There has to be consumption. So where is the demand going to come from? So in other words, the whole system of capitalism is going to be put under very, very strict conditions. The workplace exploitation, which is what COSATU spends a lot of time talking about, is going to be replaced by irrelevance, human irrelevance, because more and more human beings are going to be alienated from the workplace, and they're going to be irrelevant because machines are able to do these things much better. The nature of our politics is also going to change. Democracies are already in crisis, as you can see in the United States, simply because their economic model simply is not working. Democratic centralism countries like China are going to thrive, as you already see, simply because they can be able to act much, much faster. I think the COVID actually tells us all this. China's reaction to the COVID was much more effective than United States' reaction to COVID. The same principles will apply to any economy that is going to emerge, or any technology that is going to emerge. The issue of liberty is also being put under scrutiny. And now if you are on Facebook, Facebook knows where you are. If you are on Twitter, Twitter knows where you are. So what does it mean for our liberty? What does it mean if data that is harvested from Facebook can be used to change election, as it was done in the United States in 2016 by data from Facebook and Cambridge Analytica? I think the issue of nationality is going to change. Boundaries have been put down now because of these technologies. Issues of social cohesion is going to be even more important given the fact that inequality probably is going to be very high. So how do we keep nations together? And the ownership of means of production, especially data, because in this era, data is the new oil. And somebody was saying that if data is the new oil, because the Chinese are collecting so much data of their people, then China becomes the Saudi Arabia of the data economy. Now, just some of the examples of the work that we have done and the implications of that on our curriculum. This is political science. We teach our students political science. And this is the work that I did quite a number of years ago. Can we use artificial intelligence to build a machine that will be able to predict interstate conflict? It turns out that we can. Now, if we can, how do we teach our political scientists so that they are still relevant? Of course, we should teach them about social sciences. We should teach them about political science. We should teach them about psychology. We should teach them about data science. But they have to become information workers. We should teach them about data. We should teach them about technology. In fact, the new forms of political scientists will have to be called techno-political scientists. The health workers. This is an example of a medical image, X-ray image of the lung. So the doctor looks at this image and see whether there is a very dangerous disease called pulmonary embolism. It turns out that AI is able to read pulmonary embolism medical images better than human doctors. In fact, The Economist had a whole article just covering that, basically saying that the future of radiologists, who are doctors who specialize in reading medical images, is in jeopardy, simply because technology is able to read these medical images much, much better than human doctors. So what are the implications of this on how we teach in our medical schools? We still should teach them about physical sciences, biological sciences, medical sciences, but we need to teach them about technology. We need to teach them about AI and other technologies that are disrupting the health sector. I'm reading a book called Deep Health, Deep Medical, which is basically saying that the whole field of medical, including the entire value chain, including drug discovery, all the way to palliative care, are being disrupted by artificial intelligence. So the new forms of health workers will have to become techno health workers, and we will need to adjust our curriculums accordingly. Now, if we go to banking, we have a course called BCom, and the function of BCom is really to teach people to be able to go and work in the banks. So it turns out that much of the activities that are happening in the banks can be done by a machine. And banks are at an astonishing rate digitizing their businesses. When was the last time you visited your branch? You can be able to do everything that you used to have to go to a branch to be able to do on your smartphone. If you are not visiting your branch, what do you think is going to happen to the people who work in the branches? I think you put them on notice, and sooner or later they will be out of their jobs, because simply not too many of you are going there. So I wrote this article, I think it was on Business Day, and I really was just talking about how do bankers of the future look like. And Michael Jordan, one of our prominent bankers in South Africa, wrote back and said, bankers of the future will need to be software engineers more than economists. Then he tells us that the whole BCom, the way we teach it, must completely be changed so that we are in line with the future. So when you come and do BCom, you should be taught a little bit about engineering. In fact, you should be taught a lot about engineering because the whole bank is becoming a technology company. Of course, you have to teach them accounting. You should teach them about economics, social sciences. You should even teach them about finance, but you should teach them about technology. So the new bankers will have to become techno bankers. If you go to psychology now, when you go to factories, you are seeing people working with machines. And when we train these psychologists, and I did a little bit of psychology when I was an undergraduate student, I took 2 courses of psychology. We tended to just teach them about psychology and other social science courses. But now in this era where human beings' psychology is being affected by the machines around them, I think we need techno-psychologists who understand technology, who understand human beings, and can be able to give us a new theory of psychology on what is the psychology of a human-machine system, rather than the psychology of just a human being. Now, what do we do about all these changes that are happening around us? As you know, I am a deputy chair of the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I was deputizing President Cyril Ramaphosa. We have actually given our report. So these are the 8 key recommendations that are quite relevant on how we can prepare for the future. The first is to invest in human capacity development in areas of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I've already mentioned the fact that at UJ, AI is now a compulsory subject for all our students. So we need to invest in human capacity development. At our schooling level, I'm not a big advocate for coding. I think what we need to teach our young students is the ability to communicate in English, because coding is in English, to understand basic mathematics, and to understand logic. We need to also establish the National Artificial Intelligence Institute, because artificial intelligence is actually getting into all areas of our lives. You know, reading devices are being empowered by artificial intelligence. Agriculture, drones for delivery of medicines to rural hospitals in Kigali, and so on and so forth. We need to also establish a platform for advanced manufacturing in new materials so that we can re-industrialize. Because if we don't re-industrialize, the post-work problem that I talked about is not going to be sorted out. We need to secure and avail data to enable innovation. Data is the new oil. And unless we are teaching about data, unless we are regulating about data, then we are on a road to nowhere. If data is the new oil, how come do we allow Facebook and Twitter to come and mine data in South Africa without us even measuring how much they are mining? So those are very important issues that we need to deal with. We need to incentivize future industries, platforms, and applications of Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies. An economist was asked a question: tell us, can you summarize the whole of economics just in one word? And his answer was incentives, because with incentives, you have demand and supply. We need to build 4IR infrastructure, connectivity. Now with COVID, all of us know about connectivity problems. We know about data, and here at UJ, I was paying 6 million rand for data every month for our students. Now, the Department of Communication on Digital Technologies is actually going to be selling the spectrum. And normally it's MTN, Vodacom, Cell C that are going to go and bid for this spectrum so that they will be able to give you cellular phones. One of the recommendations that we made is that hospitals must have their own spectrum. Companies have already come to us and tell us that they need their own spectrum, because if a robot is speaking to another robot, they don't want that robot that information to be transferred using MTN network or Vodacom or any other network. They want to have their own spectrum. But universities must also have their own spectrum. Here at the University of Johannesburg, we are also talking to those who are going to be bidding for that spectrum, so that we can be involved, so that when we are doing things on drones, we can be able to do them without necessarily having to worry about the frequency bandwidth. These are the universities of the future, where universities must have all the technologies that are needed for them to do what they do, including spectrum, which traditionally we thought only telecommunication companies actually require. We need to review and amend policy and legislation so that we are able to make our laws to be in line with the fourth industrial revolution. And finally, it is all about implementation. If you need to know more about this, I have a new book, Closing the Gap. You can find it at Exclusive Books, which summarizes the future as it is emerging and how we should react as Africans. Ndolibuwa, thank you very much. Ngiyabonga kiyalibuwa. Bye, danki.
Thank you very much, Professor Marwala, for that inspiring keynote. There's a couple of thoughts there that really resound well with all our delegates. We can clearly see through the chat box that they want to engage with you. Before we get to those questions, just a few thoughts that I picked up. I enjoyed the thoughts where you spoke about knowledge mutation. And indeed, knowledge has mutated radically over the last few decades. They speak about the knowledge turnover in the field of information technology as being less than 18 months. In a year and a half, you basically got to start from scratch in terms of learning. So yes, it's remarkable. But not only has knowledge mutated, so has viruses mutated, unfortunately, which brings us to our current situation where we need to be online and away from each other. And I think that deprives many of the social togetherness, social cohesion, social interaction that is so vital. And many of our students still depend on the social interaction. I just think of our colleagues at Altasa. Many years ago, even last year, we could give a hug to somebody. We could give a firm handshake. We could even touch their arm. And sometimes just touching the arm of someone brings comfort. It brings empathy to that individual. And I think that is something that the AI developers or the field of AI needs to maybe look at more closely in the future. Yes, it is the future. I agree with you there. But it lacks that empathetic touch, which maybe somebody can research. And then just my last thought before we move to the questions, you mentioned Siri, and that many people interact with Siri. I often think of the Big Bang Theory, a sitcom on television where in a humorous way they touch on various aspects of human life. But again, in that sitcom, you can clearly see the importance of social engagement and interaction. And I think that is something still very vital for many of our students. For if students didn't require that, well, then they would go to one of the largest distance learning institutions in South Africa and in the continent. But not all students have that capacity or capability. And so our residential universities, I believe, will still play a key role in the future going forward. However, that's enough from me and a few thoughts. We want to just look at a couple of questions, please, if you may. We want to just go back, ladies and gentlemen, in the chat box to about 9:13. There was a question there. How do we teach all students to be relevant in the future? Professor Marwala, what are your thoughts on that question? How do we teach all
I think our education must become much more multidisciplinary if we are to prepare our students for the future. Those who are studying human and social sciences must also study technology. Those who are studying technology must study human and social sciences. And I think this, more than anything else, explains why Germany, a very sophisticated technological country, seems to be absent in these new types of economy that is emerging. There is no German version of Amazon, but there is a Chinese version of Amazon called Alibaba. There is no German version of Facebook, but there is a Chinese version of Facebook called Baidu. And there's no German version of even Uber. And if you go to China, they have Didi, you know. And the reason is because German education is too specialized. They give them, they teach them about engineering very well, but they do not teach them about, they don't teach their engineers social sciences as they are supposed to do. When I was an undergraduate student in North America, in the United States of America, and this is almost 30 years ago, and I transferred from University of Cape Town after 6 months. And when I arrived there, they said I should take 12 semesters of human and social sciences. So I took 2 economic classes, I took 3 acting classes, I took 6 two psychology classes and 6 economic classes. And when now I'm studying AI, we're introduced to some concept called reinforcement learning. This is a big algorithm in artificial intelligence. And I'm doing a PhD. And I always tell people that I was introduced to reinforcement learning in my psychology class in my second year, you know. So multidisciplinary education is what we need so that we can grow those World Economic Forum skills, social skills, empathy, critical analysis, things that a purely scientific training will not necessarily train you for. You know, if you are studying physics and they are teaching you about Newton's laws of motion, how critical can you be? You know, because they don't seem to. There's no room. You know, normally when they teach a theory, it is like, especially at an undergraduate level, that is like the best truth. You know, Maxwell's equation. When they teach you about Maxwell's equation, how critical can you be? But if they're teaching you about literature, that is when you start thinking, questioning things, even questioning the author, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Marwala, for that response. Another question we have: how do we shift from teaching about to teaching to become?
Well, I mean, I think our teaching must become much more project-based, you know, because traditionally, and we do quite a lot of that in South African education system, we tend to concentrate more on the content and concentrate less on, now that you have learned this, now go out there and show me how you can apply it. I mean, I still remember when I was in my second year and fluid mechanics class. And fluid mechanics, when you are in the second year, can be dry and mathematical. You know? And then I think in the middle of the of the semester, and the old Professor Prohl came to us and said, give each one of us a candle and say, go and design something that flies using this candle. Can you imagine? Some did hovercraft, some did hot air balloons, some did rockets, you know, which means you contained it within a container, and then you basically combust it, and then it explodes, and then it flies up, you know. So I think that is what we need to do. We need to our educational system must be problem-based if we are to teach people about. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Marwala, for that reply to that question. Indeed, thought-provoking. A third question: what is needed to support lecturers and students in higher education to pivot into this new era, and who will provide that support, and how will they be equipped to facilitate this?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that we need is for us to be able to understand some of these developments. And the first thing to do for all of us is to go and take courses. One of the things that we did here at the University of Johannesburg, especially from the Vice-Chancellor's office, we took about 5 people, mainly from the Faculty of Commerce, and we put them in an artificial intelligence course at MIT. Of course, it does not teach them to be experts, but just that, So you have to teach. You need to acquire new forms of skills, and university leaders must actually say what are the new forms of skills that our professors and our lecturers require, and how are we going to do about it? Are we going to call people to come and teach this and select our staff? So we absolutely need to have new skills to be able to do that. Secondly, we need to travel and see what other people are doing. Learning by experiencing is also very, very important. Let's go to other universities. Let's see what Cambridge is doing. Let's see what Stanford is doing. Let us see what MIT is doing. And I'm not talking about managers at our universities. I'm talking about our lecturers. Have they gone and sat in a class at some of these top universities around the world, just to see what happens in that classroom, so that they can be able to come back and impart it. So when our academics go to conferences, maybe that is what we should require them to do. That look for the university nearby, request somebody who is teaching the course that you teach to just come and sit. Not say anything, just sit for one lecture and see what is happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Marwala. You mentioned a very important thing there in terms of learning from others and sharing, especially in the culture of the African continent. Sharing is vitally important. And I firmly believe that also our Heltasa platform is a vital, important platform where we can share amongst each other and find solutions to problems that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. And so, yes, that sharing is vital. But you also mentioned the fact that management should equip academics with the skills they need. But I think management also needs to provide room to academics to take initiatives. Some initiatives of our academics over the last few months have been incredible in terms of getting students engaged. And then they just find themselves pegged back by various unforeseen events, which is a tragedy. Yet they continue to be courageous and to continue to endure. So really, our academics have been brilliant, I think, over the last few months. Professor Marwala, we have 1 or 2 more questions. Let me just quickly scroll down here. I found one just now regarding schools. What do you think is the future of our schools? Are there things that humans can do that machines cannot do for schools, and especially for the learners in schools? What is your thoughts on that, please?
I think our schooling system is going to become much more digital and technological. And I have always thought, especially due to the fact that I come from a rural area in Limpopo province. And one of the problems that we have in those rural areas is that we do not have teachers who are adequately skilled to be able to do what they're supposed to do. So they're not adequately skilled. So you go to schools where the math teacher, the matric math teacher, is not able to pass a math exam that is written by their teachers. I think there was a study that was done on that. And then the question is, what do you do about them? You can say maybe remove them and put other teachers who can be able to do the job. The fact of the matter is there's just no supply of math teachers in those areas. So I think technology can play a bigger role there. Online teaching can play a bigger role. Online teaching materials are going to play a bigger role. So I think what is going to happen to schooling going forward is blended learning. That we are going to use technology, we are going to use online materials to augment physical teaching. I think that is the future.
Thank you, Professor Marwala. Yes, that is the view of many, is the blended learning format. There are, of course, still hurdles, specifically at school level. I mean, many schools still struggle even to have a library where they have books for students to read. And so, yes, the online space in terms of data connectivity and data still plays a role in many provinces and poor areas of South Africa, which we will need to address going forward if this model is to become successful. In overseas countries such as the United States, it doesn't really hamper the progress of many students, and they make use of some of the best online learning platforms in the world, but it is still a challenge for us in South Africa to face. But I agree fully with your sentiments that technology will not replace the teacher. However, those who do not use technology will be replaced, definitely. We need to feature and to bring it into our teaching practice, and we need to have students partake in that because they are really digitally literate. I mean, you have babies, 6-month-old babies, 1-year-old children who are more proficient at a cell phone than what my grandmother is. So yes, we should really tap into that. That is a very good thought that you mentioned there. And of course, to also equip our academics and our teachers with the skills they need. I recently read a PhD study on inclusivity, specifically looking at the inclusion of disabled students in engineering, because there's a low representation in South Africa. And one of the questions we asked is, do we replace teachers who don't want to learn about how to teach disabled children? Do we replace them with other teachers? And the thought was that no, we should train them. We should encourage them and skill them so that they can become proficient, because they are already having the knowledge of a specific subject. They already are in the program or in the process of teaching, and so they should be upgraded or upskilled. Yes, that's a very, very important thought that you've mentioned. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that will bring us to the end of our question session for today. We thank again Professor Marwala for the time that he has taken to prepare this presentation and to deliver it here to us. I'm sure we all have benefited greatly. Thank you again, Professor Marwala.
Thank you very much, Professor Schultz.